Recording in progress.
Okay, we will call this meeting to order, Agenda and Priorities meeting for September the 6th, 2022. Begin by reading the land acknowledgement. The town of Innisfail would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the Indigenous peoples of the Treaty 7 region and Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. We respect the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our community. So we'll move into 2.1, the agenda. Any additions or deletions, CEO Becker? No. Could I please have someone make a motion to adopt the agenda?
Mayor Barclay, I would make that motion.
Thank you, Councillor Wing. All in favor? Great. We will move into 3.1. I'd like to welcome Sergeant Imey to the meeting today, and we look forward to your presentation to us. Welcome.
Sure, thank you. Appreciate being invited here. So, so we were looking at the annual priorities for the detachment, and in consultation with the town and the policing committee, there was 3 target areas that we came up with 2 initiatives per target area. So this update is going to include RCMP Q1 and then half of Q2, as we're part of the way through Q2 right now, up until around August 15th is what I have stats for right now. So it's a little bit updated from what you guys have in front of you. So the first initiative that we had was, the first target area was enhanced awareness and education, with the 2 initiatives being town hall meetings, which we ran in conjunction with the policing committee already once this year, the town hall, which was well received, and then we're planning to hopefully do one in the later fall, early winter to do a second one this year. And we'll be working with the town on setting that up. But it seemed like the first one went very well. It was very well received, and yeah, it was good. Second one is member attendance at community events. So our goal for this one for the year was set at 50 distinct events, and so that's not 50 members showing up to one thing, but 50 different events that between 1 to many members are going to. For first quarter, we had 32, and the second we had 10 more so far, so we're already sitting at 42, with 50 being the goal, so we'll well exceed that, probably by double by the end of the year would be my guess. So, and that includes events like the Danes Rodeo, the Stanley Cup event, Canada Day, the soapbox derbies, all that kind of stuff. The next target area that we had was on prolific offenders. The 2 initiatives on that, the first was habitual offender management, which is a new program for the detachment. We kind of had a bit of a late start on this one. Our goal for the year was set at 300 checks of our habitual offenders. Right now, after halfway through Q2, we're sitting at 65. We've just rejigged how we were assigning these, so I'm anticipating these numbers to go up fairly significantly over the next few months. The other issue we've had is that many of our prolific offenders are either have found themselves to jail or currently wanted on warrants or have left the community, so that also works as well. The next is intelligent-led enforcement initiatives, and for this our goal was 6 for the year. We had 2 of these in Q1, and we have 2 started for Q2 right now. So we're well on our way to hit our goal for that. And the last target area was enhanced road safety with joint multi-agency traffic operations. The target for this initiative was 30. Right now we're sitting at 10 so far, halfway through Q2. So we had a bit of a slow start on this as well, just because of some staffing issues, but we'll be well towards meeting our goal for that one as well. And then the last one was moving violations, provincial enforcement. Target was 360 for the year, and we're already sitting at 276 halfway through Q2. So we will more than well exceed that goal as well. So yes, that's pretty much the update for the APP, pending any questions that Mayor Council would have.
Does anyone have any questions so far? Okay, no. Okay. At this time.
The only other update that I had was in relation to some crime stats that I'd sent them. So just to quickly go through it, there's quite a bit of pages, but the highlights really, and this is so crime stats are often 1 year behind once they're tabulated by Stats Canada. So this is comparing 2020 stats to 2021. And so for the crime severity index, which is generally a score of kind of the most serious offenses that happen, the crime severity index for Innisfail fell by 24.6% from 2020 to 2021. Now, the majority of the province also saw a decrease, but the average in Alberta was a decrease of 6%. So we did see quite a significant drop in that year. So crime severity index for Innisfail is at 111, which is just slightly ahead of the provincial average, which is, I believe, 101. Yeah, the biggest reason for decrease was we had a complete lack of homicides the entire year. Stolen property was down, as were sex assaults, and that's what drove that down the most. So,
Mayor Barkley, to the delegation, Ian, are you able to explain that index, severity index, how that works? How do you develop that number?
so yeah, that number's not developed by us. It's not an RCMP thing. It's a Statistics Canada metric. And so what they use it for is for, like, there's a lot of things that get reported to the police, some of it very serious, some of it less serious. The crime severity index ranks things based on seriousness, and then they assign a value to it. So obviously a homicide is a very high valued item, a sex assault is fairly high valued, a theft of something minimal is a very low value thing. I can't tell you exactly what the numbers are and how they assign the rankings to it, but they do that, and they pick, and I believe it's 10 to 15 of these high crime values, and they use those to determine essentially how safe or how dangerous a place would be. So they have everything in there from murders, homicides, sex assaults, but then also frauds are part of that too. So it's not necessarily just violent crime, it's just crime in general. So yeah, so the three things that decreased it were those three things that I told you about, and then the two increases from 20 to 21 were in robberies and frauds, were a slight increase in that 1 year. So does that answer your question, Mr. Becker? Okay.
Councillor Wing?
Excuse me. Thank you, Mayor Barkley. I just have a question relative to the collection of the stats that appear through Stats Canada. I hope that the RCMP, regardless of the location, would be consistent in the way they collect their stats. But what about the municipal forces? So when we think about Calgary and Edmonton, do they collect their statistics in the same way, define their situations in the same way?
For the most part, yes. So it all uses, it's called a UCR, Uniform Crime Reporting, and so that would be what all the police forces in the country use to record their stats. And obviously, like, there can be variance on the way that maybe a certain officer perceives a situation and scores it, which could cause it. But for any of your major scenarios, you're not going to have much of a variance, right? If you've called to a homicide, like it's a homicide, it's not a fraud, right? For some of the less serious stuff, there's maybe a little bit more variance. And was that causing a disturbance, or was that a bylaw offense? Right, because there's some overlap, right? So sometimes some things can be scored a little bit differently, but for the most part, it's fairly uniform across the country. They would have different databases on how they enter it, but they're still responsible for reporting the same data and in the same manner that Stats Canada needs to have it.
Okay.
So that's kind of like a countrywide thing, which is kind of where we're a little bit ahead of the states, because they don't always have that in some places, right? So sometimes your statistics can be way off.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And then sometimes, is there a difference in the way, what's the way I want to say this? You'll get a call, you may choose to respond or not, or you may capture that data differently than you might hear about in Calgary or Edmonton.
Possibly, and I would say that generally the biggest driver of that is citizens' willingness to report.
Absolutely.
Right, so like when I lived in Regina and my house got broken into 3 times, I didn't call the police on it, right? I would think most people in Innisfail probably would.
Okay.
So oftentimes you see that in larger cities, you'll see kind of a drop in crime statistics, and I often wonder if it's because people just are not reporting things because they figure nothing's going to happen.
Thank you for that, and I think we're seeing that in Innisfail, especially with minor crime. I don't think people are calling the way maybe they once did.
And maybe, right?
Yeah,
Maybe.
yeah.
But I still think for the most part, I think people do. Like, I think people are comfortable in reporting. They're not
I hope they
afraid
do.
to at least phone and ask, right? Because we get those calls too, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Councillor Hystad would like to ask a question. Councillor Hystad's online, just so everyone knows.
Thanks, Sergeant. I didn't know when to ask this question, but I was just wondering when or if the RCMP in Innisfail are they in communication with the Innisfail Anonymous Community Crime Watch group at all? And the reason why I'm asking that question is I see some, they have 528 members on the group, but some of I do find some of the stuff that's on that page can be not too flattering to certain individuals that may just be walking around town. Is there an opportunity for you guys to have a conversation with them to making sure that they're, working with you and the town and maybe assisting the policing committee in a very constructive way? I just thought I'd throw that one out at you.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. Like, we don't have like a formal, I guess, agreement or relationship, I guess, with that group. Like, I've had a few discussions and meetings with the guy that runs that page, and there's some good things that happen from that page. There's, some things that maybe, are difficult, I guess, but there's a lot of emotion sometimes in that page. But you're right though. There's things that are unflattering and maybe, like they kind of operate in a way that they're not necessarily accountable. They post what they post, right? Which is kind of different than how we operate. But you're right though. Like, there probably is some room for some increased maybe cooperation and.
Yeah, I was looking at, not only with the policing committee that I sit on with Councillor Maceros, but with the RCMP. And then I guess, sorry to jump right into this, Mayor Barkley, just the victim services, Victim Services is coming to speak to us about some changes provincially. Has K Division had a specific statement on some of those changes or anything that you can share with us today?
Yeah, no, there's been nothing communicated to us differently than what you guys have had. And truthfully, most of the information I had came first from you guys than from anywhere else. So yeah, no, unfortunately, there's still a lot up in the air with that whole, I guess, proposal, I guess.
Thanks. That's all I got.
Councillor Harrison?
Thank you, Mayor Barkley, and through to Sergeant here. The question I have, and I'd like to go back to reporting or reluctance of reporting crimes. Many people may have had a bad experience. You report the crime. RCMP don't come. They don't show up. Or they get, your crime's been referred to the on-call unit. And a question that I have is, can you elaborate on what the on-call unit is?
Sorry, do you mean the callback unit? Is that what you're referring to?
I understood it was referred to as the on-call unit.
Okay.
And they would get back to the person in 3 to 5 days. So maybe, can you just give us some kind of, and this came out of your central dispatch in Edmonton. So can you just give us an idea so that when we're asked by the public, because a number of times I said, well, why should I report it?
Yeah.
Because nothing happens, but we can, and I keep saying, well, we need the statistics so that we can help our detachment beef up or.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a few things in there, and yeah, we may just have our terms crossed because they could be two different things that we're talking about. So the detachment here operates on a bit of an on-call basis after hours, right? So there's a couple hours, night depending on the night, where we would have members that are on call ready to respond, right? But then there's also, through K Division, they have what they call the callback unit, which often is used for crimes that people are reporting, mostly for information purposes, right? So often it's things that have happened maybe, but maybe they're dated, They're phoning in to say, there was a suspicious person that I saw yesterday wearing a blue jacket, and then there was a break-in maybe somewhere around that time, kind of thing. So they'll take those reports, but they may not dispatch a member to go do anything with it right away, right? Because often it's after the fact, and it's more of a information gathering call. Now, if someone were to call in when my officers are on call, but it's something where somebody needs to respond, then they're dispatched and they respond, just the same as they would from the detachment. it's just kind of a different process of how it goes. So there's not much, at least in my experience, from Innisfield that gets sent to the callback unit. So a lot of times in very small detachments, they may not have somebody working over the weekend. Maybe they're on call for an entire weekend. We never have that, right? We're not 24 hours, but we're getting closer and closer to that all the time. So generally speaking, like 3 to 5 days should be, I wouldn't say that it should never happen, but it should almost never happen that it's 3 to 5 days that somebody's waiting to get a call back. 3 to 5 hours maybe on something very minor, that's possible. But for the most part, it should be that day that somebody's getting a call back. As far as encouraging people to report, like we always encourage people to report, and often, unfortunately, there's situations that there is nothing that we can do. But if we're not aware of a problem, because we've had that in the past too, where someone said, well, you know, these people are causing problems on our street, but then we look at what we have, and I'm like, we don't even know who you're talking about. Like, we've never been dispatched there. We've never spoken to them. Right? So if people don't call us, then it's hard for us to make something a priority or even at least try to fix it for them. So I definitely would encourage people to call if they have things, and if, at the very least, call the detachment if they think, hey, because we get this sometimes, you know, that some people they're worried about wasting people's time, right? Which we get. Just call and you can talk to somebody, right? And, you know, they can give you advice on what the best is, and they're probably going to tell you yeah, we'll make a report, we'll open a file.
So just to follow up to that then, so do you I know you encourage people, but do you communicate to our constituents that we need to report?
Yeah, like it's definitely something we brought up at the town hall, for sure.
Yeah.
I know Staff Sergeant Matichuk had brought it up before. We definitely talked with the policing committee about that. Oftentimes, you know, when a specific crime happens and we're putting out a news release, we do like encourage people to call in like about specific stuff. To my recollection, I can't remember if we put out just a general thing. It's something we can definitely look at, though.
Okay,
Just
thank you very
encourage
much, Sergeant.
Sergeant Ivey, in that conversation with Councillor Harrison, you mentioned that maybe you're getting closer to 24 hours. Would that be like within the context of a current roster or?
Yeah, so what it is, so even right now, so depending on the staffing, like we've gotten to the point where we've had generally every day 4 hours on call, right? Right now, we've got that down to 2. And then depending on what's going on in the day, sometimes there is people here 24 hours, right? So is it something that I see 24-hour policing being the standard moving forward? No, not yet. Not without an increase in officers, right? There's just not enough human beings for us to be able to do that. But it's being significantly cut down, so. And
then my second question would be around, I know there's an acronym for it, I think it's RPACT, the mental health professional. Now, I believe that's out of Rocky Mountain House, is it? And
That's
is that
right.
being used in this community? And I guess secondly, are you finding that mental health calls, is that impacting your roster or your members, as in needing to take people potentially into the Red Deer Hospital and then sit for a number of hours until someone can see them? And
yeah, for sure. So to answer the first part, yes, it's out of Rocky Mountain House is kind of the district that we fall under for that. And we have been utilizing them. The number of mental health calls, and I guess this is going back to other places I've worked, are probably less here than other places I've worked. And I think that's just it's a family community. People seem to have people, right, to help them here, which is good. But we do get those calls, right, for dealing with people. And then the biggest issue for us is not necessarily those calls because we deal with them, but you're right, it's taking people to the hospital. And sometimes not just Red Deer, often it's also been Calgary, where we're mandated by a court order to take somebody to Calgary. And now we're running shorter or calling in overtime here to backfill. And somebody's going down to the Rocky View Hospital and sitting there for 4 to 9 hours, right? So it is a bit of an issue, yeah.
okay, thank you. Any further questions? No, I don't think so. So thank you again for coming today. We really appreciate it.
Sure.
And look forward to the next visit.
Sure, thanks.
Okay. So next we have Mary Dawn Eggleton from Victim Services. Welcome, Mary Dawn. It's a good combination today, RCMP then Victim Services. So.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Barclay, Town Council, staff. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Mary Dawn Eggleton, and I'm the Executive Director at Victim Services. I've been there just about 3 years now. Recently, we've had an announcement regarding VSU being redesigned. So I just wanted to take a moment today to let you guys know what that redesign actually will look like in Innisfail specifically, and how that it will affect your community moving forward. So maybe we can throw some choices or options out on the table. So kind of a background. VSU is located right in our detachment. We work right alongside with the members. So when we are dealing with referrals, they come directly to us in a timely manner. Sometimes as the incident is occurring, we're able to actually go out with them during a crisis type call out and help them. So prior to June of 2020, we had the Victims of Crime Act. Whenever somebody pays a fine, they pay a surcharge on that fine, and that fine was mandated by the Victims of Crime Act to go back into victim programming. So whether that was VSU units, but it was all funneled generally through the Solicitor General and through right back directly to the victims of crime. In that, there was a resulting of a $74 million surplus, which made the news. And then the government was very concerned about how come there was this big surplus in this Victims of Crime Act, and how come this money wasn't necessarily being used penny for penny back to the victims. So I wrote the wrong date there, but in June 26th of 2020, Bill 16 came about. What it did was it opened up the Crime Act to become the Victims of Crime and the Public Safety Act. And in that, people could apply for more of the money, so the money was dispersed into more areas as long as it was a victim focus. But they also opened up that money to be able to hire more Crown prosecutors and supposedly put more members, boots on the ground, more frontline police force. Did we see that? I'm not going to comment, and I'm not sure where all that went. They state that there's still some surplus left in the act. I know victim services programs rurally and the smaller programs other than Edmonton or Calgary did not see an increase in their budgets. So there was no budget increases that were put back into the average VSU unit. In September 2020, then there was an MLA-led crime review of the Victims of Crime Act, where the money was going. What we used to have was a financial benefits program that was a monetary value that if you were a victim of crime, it was sort of we're very sorry this happened to you. Here's how you can kind of start your journey again. Here's how your healing journey. It didn't make it right. So, if somebody was sexually assaulted, it didn't say, well, here's, sorry you were sexually assaulted. But what it did was maybe now you can't go back to your job that you were working, maybe the trauma piece and all that. And it was a bit of a financial, a bit of a financial helper to kind of put them back on the road, right? That was, they took that away. It was completely abolished. Basically what it was if you were severely hurt, let's say a gunshot, a quadriplegic, paraplegic, then you would get some home care amounts. They offered you 4 sessions of counseling virtually through an EAP program. And they would pay, if you were sexually assaulted or the family of somebody who was murdered, they would pay for you to, or a direct witness, they would pay for you to go to court. So that was basically what happened to all the financial benefits programs. There was nothing left. So the MLAs, they came back with 19 recommendations. They consulted with VSUs, they consulted with boards. We kind of had the idea that they had an idea of what they were doing before they consulted with us, but they did listen to us. We went through several consultations. I did submit the recommendations for you guys to purview later in your packages if you were curious about what they all were. The one that affected us the that I think is most directly to the new redesign is in the number 3. It stated to develop a sustainable service delivery model that reflects the nuances of rural, urban, and metro communities, but ensures equitable service for victims, which sounds great. I'm like, that sounds, and if you look in the smaller print on the number 3, it actually states that if your VSU is servicing an area of more than 15,000 people, that it should go to a municipal model, because that smaller units were great, get them to band together, give them the resources that they needed. We service just over 20,000 people. So we're Innisfail, Red Deer County, and Penhold. So we go out to Spruce View. We see the same district as your RCMP attachment sees. So in that, we were like, okay, well, how come we were kind of banded together with everybody? So on July 19th, Tyler Shandro made a 2-tiered VSU redesign announcement. The first one was an enhanced victim financial benefits program, which basically took us back to what the financial benefits program looked like prior to them messing with everything. They gave back some of the money. They gave back enhanced counseling services, which is great. We needed that. They've tiered it out that if you're a victim of a major crime, that you could get they'd pay for your Alberta Blue Cross and some more of that type of stuff. The second part of the announcement was a VSU zonal model. So we are all, most of us, with their 62 board operated VSUs, which is what our VSU here in Innisfail is. So those 62 boards would be disbanded, and we would then be redesigned under 4 zonal boards. So what those 4 zonal boards match up with is the RCMP zones themselves. So we would be in the Central Alberta zone. They were keeping, there's 9 municipal and Indigenous operated VSU programs that are being left alone. So they're not going to be touched at all. So Edmonton, Red Deer, Calgary, the municipal ones. And then there is 6 Indigenous units that are being left alone. So with that, we'll be the Central Alberta Victim Services, and our regional office they're proposing will be in Leduc. So not at all near where we are at all. And how the breakdown of the actual structure of that. So right now, our structure is, I'm the executive director, I have a program administrator underneath me, the board, they oversee everything, and then I have victim service advocates who are actually all here to support me here today. So we have our victim service advocates who are very trained and skilled at what they're doing. The new model, and so there'll be 4 of these in Alberta. So there'll be the regional board of directors. There'll be 10 to 12 members. Those regional directors will come from all across Central Alberta. You'll have 1 executive director, 1 regional manager, and then the central professional staff, which will be your administration. There'll be a human resources person, a legal team, and a financial management team, and then your cultural safety specialist. And then under that will be, for our region, I think they're proposing about 47 caseworkers. Everybody will work out of the regional office. The caseworkers will no longer be what they're proposing. They haven't firmly stuck their stamp on anything. But the caseworkers will be attached to a file now. They will not be attached to a detachment. So we could have 12 different caseworkers come in and out of the detachment, working with the members, and as well as the caseworkers could be working in every single detachment in Central Alberta. So all referrals will go directly to the zone and then be fielded out to the caseworkers, probably in 4 to 6 days. So it's the personal relationships are being centralized. One of my advocates asked if you wanted the best reference of how this might look is think about EMS services right now and how they're being centralized, right? So that's basically what ours will look like as well. So what does this actually look like for us? Right now, our community representation, we have input right at our board level. All our board members are right here from Innisfail. They can represent the community needs. Community partnerships are fostered. We get to spend time doing prevention work and just meeting the people and being out there in the community. Today, for those who were able to attend, we had our community barbecue. So we're able to do that stuff. After redesign for community representation, we'll be able to have a community member apply to be one of 10 or 12 members. So and you don't know if your caseworkers will actually be a local caseworker. So it's hard to tell. So funding, currently we're funded primarily by the Solicitor General. We get about $133,000 a year for our unit. For the last 2 years, we've been on a yearly grant cycle. Originally, we were on a 3 to 4 year grant cycle. So they took that away. They put us onto yearly grant cycles, but then they announced they're putting back the 3 year grant cycles so that the big boards only have to apply every 3 years. We also do local fundraising. So we, every Wednesday during the summer, we have a sales kiosk at the police dog kennels, and all that money just goes right back into our victims programs. So to pay for hotels, meals when you're not safe, anything like that. So bus tickets if they need it, if they're fleeing safety. So all that money goes directly right back in. So when will this happen? It was originally proposed that it would happen April 1st, 2023. They decided that maybe that wasn't a little realistic. They now want 4 to 6 months to hire an implementation consultant. They have said that this implementation consultant, they get to decide anything they want to decide, that they will give recommendations, but the implementation consultant will be able to make the final word on what happens to VSU. So the new proposed date is April 1st, 2024. They expect us all to be into regional zones. So who does this affect? What does this actually look like? Because if we don't actually talk about what does this look like actually specifically for Innisfail? So in 2021, we had 175 files, 179 files were opened. We went on to 19 crisis callouts. So that means all hours of the day. If a victim needed us, the officers called us to a call out. We had 68 clients receive court support, so we accompany them to court. We go with them while they're going through the whole justice process. To date already, though, in 2022, these stats were pulled on August 15th. We have 161 files opened new this year. So already you can see that our numbers right up just about with only half the year, we're sitting at just about what our full year was last year. We've already gone on 34 crisis callouts, and we've accompanied 57 clients receiving court supports of some type. And so a lot of times they come to our office, they do court prep, they go review their statements. We take them to the courthouse to see the courtrooms. We've done a lot of court supports with children and just helping them through the process because it's scary having to go to court and to testify. 101 of those files are Innisfail direct files, 40 of them are Penhold files, and 20 of them are Red Deer County files. So we're sitting about 70% of our caseload is Innisfail, about 30% is elsewhere. Our referrals come from the police, they come from the Crown prosecutors directly, they come from other outside agencies that we work with here in town, and we get the self-referrals. People just calling, they don't know what to do, they don't know how they're going to deal with this. So are we concerned? We definitely are, or else I wouldn't be here today. And it's not all VSU units are the same as ours. So not all things are equal. And I think that that is where the original crime-led review came from, is because not all are equal. But I think why not fix the broken ones than to tear down one that's working really well, right? So honestly, I'm hoping, the guys behind me will back it up, but we do work really well together here in Innisfail to make sure we are servicing your community the best way we can. So one of the things we're going to miss the most in the new model is that we will not be able to do trauma files. So currently right now, so a trauma file is a file that is not a major crime. It is a file where somebody has been traumatized. So let's say a sudden death, a car accident. So it not necessarily was a major crime attached to it, but there's definitely trauma there, sudden deaths. We often go out with our members when they have to do a next of kin notification. So 30 to 40% of our files currently are trauma-based files, so they do not have a violent crime attached to it. So as of the redesign, we will not be able to encompass violent crime files. The Solicitor General legislation states that the Victims of Crime Act money can only go towards violent crimes. So that's where our fundraising dollars come in, is so that we can help those other 30 to 40% of those files. And that we shuffle around in staff wages and stuff to cover those 40%. So that'll be the biggest thing we lose right off the bat, is that sudden death, next of kin, car accidents, fires, anything that's not a violent crime, we will not be able to attend. We will not be able to do crisis callouts. None of that, all that will be gone for your community. Second part we'll notice the biggest impact is individual supports. So caseworkers may not be local to the area. We've been told that we will all have to reapply if we would like to be a caseworker. So we don't even know where these, like who will be and make up the employment, the employees. So we may not have local representation. That I think creates a huge gap in understanding what is needed and what is available. Innisfail has some very unique opportunities and supports here. We have a very strong FCSS. We have community members who I can just call and say, you know, it's not their formal title or anything, and I just call them and say, hey, I need this. Can you help me with that? And they're like, oh yeah, sure. Or how about you call over to this person? They can do half of it, right? And so I think that we lose that type of personal and that individual support of making sure that everybody just gets helped, right? And at the end of the day, that's all we want. The other part we're going to notice is in our court supports. So currently we have an individualized court process. Not everybody requires the same thing when they go to court. Our unit doesn't specifically have support dogs, but we were actually in the process of trying to get a support dog. Support dogs are huge when you have people who have been victimized, and just having that compassionate, non-judgmental animal at your feet when you're testifying can be huge. We find that especially in children or people who are victims of sex assault. The support dogs are amazing, and they can absorb their emotions and their feelings and keep them a little more balanced. We're able to also be more hands-on. We're able to walk the person directly through the court process. We can help them out days, weeks, months ahead. We are more hands-on with our Crown prosecutors. We know them all personally out of the Red Deer Courthouse. If we're spread out throughout Alberta, we've got Crown prosecutors now from every office that we don't have those same relationships with. We're trying to, at the end of the day, be less traumatic. The court process and the justice system is traumatic either way. Let's make it the least amount as possible. After the redesign, it'll be a system-wide court support process. So everybody will have to follow the exact same process. Everybody will go through the exact same motions, and the individualization of it is taken out. And what they need is not necessarily what we can give them anymore. They're talking about we possibly won't even have support dogs anymore. So that'll all the support dogs will have to come from outside agencies. And currently we have 2 agencies in Red Deer that have a dog. And so and you can just imagine when you got 2 dogs that are trying to service all of the area. So it's just a lot. Our volunteer advocates. So we spend a lot of time with our volunteer advocates, training them, helping them to be a part of your community and having them give back to their community. That's often why they want to be there, is they want to be there when somebody needs them the most. Under the new model, they have basically said, we don't know what the volunteer advocate piece will look like. They've thrown out that possibly they'll be managed by the regional office. I don't know how that would work. Most of my advocates have expressed that if they're managed by a regional office out of Leduc, they probably will not continue with the position. So we don't know what that looks like for them. So it's a shame, because they are definitely a huge valued member of our team. RCMP responsibility. So you can guess, if we're not doing the trauma piece anymore, who gets to do the trauma piece? Right? So it goes, and don't get me wrong, they are alongside us during the whole thing. But they have to have a time when they can step out, and they're not, fully and go and do the crime stuff, right? And where we then still continue to pick up the mental health piece. We're picking up the trauma piece. and the grief support. And so it will go back onto the RCMP to be doing more of those social worker responsibilities and duties. So because there won't be anybody left. So they'll be the ones to do the NOKs and all that. Our community partners, there'll be no opportunities for community partnering. So the partners we've built and fostered right now will no longer be maintained because we'll be spread out. We won't have, our mandate won't be to build those partnerships. They won't be to have the community barbecues or to be going on the domestic violence walks or anything like that. That's just won't be our mandate. So prevention, they've told us specifically there will be no prevention work. So we will no longer be doing prevention at all. So we will be responding to victims of a violent crime, helping them with the justice process, and that is it. There will be none of the other stuff. So I leave that with you guys. What now? Basically, if the government has made their stance, they've told us what they're doing, and I just wanted to let you guys know how this affects our unit, how this affects Innisfail, and how this affects the people here, and leaving that in your hands. Do you have any questions?
Well, Mary Dawn, first of all, thank you for coming today and presenting, and thank you to all the volunteers, board members that are here today to support you and support our community. My opinion, this is totally unacceptable. You had mentioned at a previous meeting we had that there may be an opportunity to bring victim services within the municipality. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so there are, like I expressed, there are some municipalities that have a municipal run VSU. So they take care of the budget, they take care of, and basically we become municipal employees. We become separate from Solgen, which all they do is provide funding. So that's not a big thing. The only other thing we would have to work and establish is with K Division, we would have to establish a new memorandum of understanding that allows us to stay in the detachments. So that's the only part that we would need on there. But yeah, so like Red Deer has a memorandum of understanding. They have city employees working out of their detachment. They also have their program manager is a RCMP member. So they're structured just a little bit differently there, but their whole budget, their employees are all paid by the city. So, and I think that was part of the reason why they didn't get touched, is Solgen does give them grant money to run part of that program, but then the city picks up the rest of it. So
that was my question. So the units that are still under that model, they do get funding from Solgen?
They're still getting funding from Solgen as well. Yeah.
Okay.
So.
And then the process to go that route, like, is that available?
Yeah, for sure. From my understanding is that Solgen says that they will entertain conversations around that they will have the discussion, and that they are open that each, individual municipality should be treated as individual in entering this. And I think if they're going to go directly by the recommendations where they're saying any VSU that has more than 15,000 for population, then, it's in their writing that we should definitely be considered then for, a municipal model. So.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bates?
Yeah, my question is, so from a provincial basis, this ship has sailed?
Yes.
And when did it leave the dock?
When we were sleeping. So in June, yeah.
This June?
Yeah.
Because I followed the steps up too.
Yeah.
How did it fly so low below the radar of all of us?
So I think it was because of the small increments, by them first opening up the act, to being allowed access to the money that was originally set. I don't think any of us believed that they would take such a radical, throwing out all the good, while trying to fix what may not be working in other areas. And so then when they then we had no idea the announcement was even coming. They told us 24 hours ahead of time. In fact, some of us only knew that is because we heard they were gathering the forces in Sylvan. So, yeah.
Well, and, I mean, we all hear what's going on with provincial police and all the other
Yeah.
things, but, yeah, this one didn't get as much press as I would have expected it
No.
to, and,
No.
I know we have in correspondence something from another town, but, yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
I think they highlighted the fact of the return of the financial benefits. It was like, here, we're gonna give you all this wonderful money that they had actually taken away 2 years before. And then they, they buried the lead, so.
Yeah, that is absolutely accurate. There was a press conference that day in Sylvan Lake.
Yeah.
And it was 90% about the funding, and then if you read through it all and listened, it was a little bit of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that was exactly it.
Yeah, for sure. Councillor Harrison?
Thank you, and thank you, Mary Dawn, for coming and giving the presentation. I have a comment, and then I have a question. The comment is, I've used victim services, and it was around a car, or a very serious motor vehicle accident. And I'll tell you, your workers, it wasn't in this community, it was up north, but it was within hours. So I think it's a very needed service. And my question is, what can we do? You've listed some options that, that we can certainly discuss at this table here. But is there anything that we can do to put some pressure on the government? Because like you say, this was done when, in the wee hours of the morning and we were all asleep. So we need to be able to talk to somebody about how this is going to affect our community, because it certainly will.
Yeah.
I look at the sergeant here, and and his members are now busy and strapped, and we're looking at 40% of your time spent on trauma, motor vehicle accidents, that kind of thing. All of a sudden now that goes to a member.
Yeah.
First of all, do they have time? Probably not, because they're investigating and whatever.
Yeah.
So who's going to do that? Again, our residents and constituents are going to fall through the cracks, and it's going to be downstream costs that we're going to incur. So
Yeah.
I guess I'll just wrap up by, if you can answer that question, what can we do as a community to further this in view of your presentation?
I think part of it is to get loud and noisy, right? And I think get other communities that feel the same, because there are some communities like Sylvan that are embracing the redesign because they don't have a VSU, just from history type things that have happened. And I think what happens is, the 5 units that are unhealthy and the communities that didn't have become noisy, and that's who's being heard, right? And so then the units like ours that are very strong we got lost in the background somewhere, right? So
Mayor Barclay, can I just have a supplemental question? Who does this unit, lack of a better term, report to? Is there a provincial sort of umbrella?
Yeah, so we report to the Solicitor General.
So you're reporting to government, so you can voice and get as noisy as you want, but where does it go?
It goes nowhere.
Okay, thank you. You've answered my question.
Yeah. So that's, and Tyler Shandro is our direct MLA on that, right? So.
Councillor Heisted?
Yeah, thanks so much for this presentation. I think how things like this get lost, there is a press release in July, I think it was July 19th when it was done. So, which is really, that's what cowards do when you're going to inform people during the busiest time when people are trying to enjoy their summertime. But I think there's an opportunity even engaging our MLA, and has that been done with your victim services unit? And how I'm looking at this is myself and Councillor Massaro sit on our policing committee. I think it'd be a good opportunity for you to present to our committee as well sometime in the fall. But advocacy should be happening at this is why we're elected in our positions, to assist. And I'm sorry to hear about this. And I do believe our victim services has been leaders for well over 20 years on that community basis. So I want to thank you and your team for all the work that you've done over the years. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor.
Yeah, and our MLA was at the announcement in Sylvan Lake beside Minister Shandro when
Yeah.
they announced this. So, CEO Becker, I guess I would like to see more information come back to council with respect to a model for our community. And shall I make a motion to that respect, or future council meeting you could bring information back, and after some discussions maybe with Mary Dawn and others?
You can jump into developing a model or a business case, or you can direct administration to conduct our own analysis. You know, we did have a preliminary chat with Mary Dawn and some board members, but we have not moved into doing more diligent evaluation of VSU from a provincial level. That may be a good start, unless you're prepared for us administratively to move into developing a model.
No, I think more so a motion where you would bring back to council more information
Sure.
surrounding this issue, and you know, where we can move forward, I
Perfect,
guess,
yeah.
with something, so.
That'd be
that's
appropriate
yeah, okay.
from my
So
perspective.
that's the motion. So,
Is that the motion?
yeah,
Okay. I'll speak in a minute then.
yeah. Go ahead, Councillor. Wayne.
Well, actually, my question is relative to the Alberta Municipalities Convention in 2 weeks. Have we seen an agenda? Because that might prove to be a place that we can do some advocacy and have some conversations with like-sized communities in the province. I haven't seen an agenda yet.
I think, you know, like, this would probably be something that you could move forth as a resolution, but we're past that time frame. But I think advocating to other communities, and as Mary Dawn said, there are communities that are championing this. They were very happy to hear this announcement, and I asked them why, and it was because they were not very functional in their own community. So it was, you know, and spoke to Minister Shander last week and asked him about this specifically, and it was all around sustainability. So we have communities that are struggling, victim services aren't getting what they need, so therefore we're going to change it all. But yeah, I think we can have administration bring something back, and some direction, and more information in a future council meeting. Okay. Anybody else have any comments? Or? Okay, all in favor of the motion? Okay, thank you. And again, thank you very much for coming today. It's
Thank you so much for your
okay.
time.
Thanks for all
Thank
you
you.
do. Well, welcome. Next we have on the agenda 3.3, we have CEO from the South Red Deer Regional Wastewater Commission, who is going to enlighten us today about the wastewater system that we have. So welcome, Michael, and thank you for coming today. We appreciate it.
Thought it was on already, sorry about that. So my name again is Michael Weatherick. I'm the CEO for the South Red Deer Regional Wastewater Commission. I've been in that position for a little over 4 years now, so I'm starting to get a pretty good handle on the system overall. The commission recently had a strategic planning session at the board level to kind of talk about how the commission can prepare itself for the future. And one of the outcomes of that discussion was that a lot of communities at the elected official level, and as well as at the citizenry level, don't really know a lot about what the commission is about and its assets and its services and value to the community. So that's what we're going to cover to some extent today. We also have some upcoming project in Innisfail that most people be aware of, which is the pending emergency storage pond that'll be built here at some point in the next 6 to 12 months. And then I'll touch briefly on a few of the long-term challenges that were identified by the board, where elected officials can play a big role in maintaining the sustainability of the commission overall. So go on to the next one there, please, Karen. So just very briefly, a lot of people don't understand the size of this asset. It's when it was built, was the largest wastewater collection system in Canada, if not North America. It encompasses about little over 90 kilometers of pipe, ranging in size from 22 inches to 34 inches. So if you look down at your leg, that's about 34 inches. The pipe is this big. It's a massive piece of infrastructure. There are 4 regional lift stations, each in the towns of Olds, Bowden, Innisfail, and Penhold. So each town pumps to the downstream station, so the volumes just keep increasing as you go along the line. At the end of the line, just before it goes into the Red Deer treatment plant, there's an odor management facility that treats any of the off gases that are generated during the transmission period. There's quite a bit of hydrogen sulfide that is built up in the system, which tends to collect at the end of the line. So that's required for odor abatement as well as just public safety. You can probably barely see it on this little map, but that green line is what's known as the Waskesiu Regional System. That's also under the administration of SRD. That was built back in 1983 by Red Deer County to handle at the time Penhold, Springbrook, and Gasoline Alley. So collectively, the total installed capital value of the assets of SRD that we look after about $200 million. When I looked at the 2021 financial statements for Innisfail, just again to put it into perspective, the undepreciated capital that's ever been spent in Innisfail for every road, park, wastewater line, water line, whatever, is about $150 million. So we're talking about a fairly extensive capital investment. This was funded in Water for Life program, so it was 90% funded by provincial and federal governments. The remaining 10% is covered by debentures that the commission members pay as part of your rate model. On to the next one, please, Kara. So the commission itself is a regional service commission under the provisions of the Municipal Government Act. So we have a bylaw and a board of directors. Mayor Barkley is the primary, and Councillor Wing, who I've actually not met until right now, is the the alternate for this year. So each of the 6 member communities appoint 1 director, and that'll be coming up here in probably October this year, I would presume, for your org meetings. The management of the commission, myself and Don Monroe were both consultants, so the commission has no formal staff. I come from an oil field background, senior management experience in the oil field, and I look after generally everything in the system, so overseeing operations, management, financial administration, health, safety, all that good stuff. Don Monroe is our operations supervisor. He's got about 45 years of public works experience, most of it in the wastewater end of the system. Don's a fantastic resource for SRD because prior to coming on board as operations supervisor, he was the construction inspector for Stantec when this line was built. So Don literally saw every chunk of pipe, every valve, every wire be installed on the system. So he's been a great resource. So Don and I look after things kind of on the central level. In each town, including in Innisfail, the contract operating of the local lift station is done through your public works department. And Terry's the main guy that we deal with there. So where the lift station is located, most of you probably already know, but it's down along 61st Avenue, just offsets the former wastewater lagoons. Ignore that little green box there with the storage pond. That's an old placeholder drawing. We'll get into that in a second here. But we do have an approved ISIP grant funding application to build a emergency storage pond immediately offsetting this location, but we're waiting on a condition to be removed from the federal government, which was tied to the lease agreement being executed. So here's a couple pictures of what the lift station looks like. It's rather large. When you drive by it on the street, it doesn't look like much of a building, but it's about 40 or 50 feet underground where there's pipes and parts and pieces underneath. Innisfail was the first station to come online in the SRD system. It came on about April 2013, and at the time was pumping through the Waskesiu system until the regional line was built. It handles volumes not only from Innisfail, but also, as I mentioned earlier, Olds and Bowden as well go through the station. We pump about 6,300 cubes a day, give or take, of which 40%, give or take, comes directly from the town of Innisfail. SRD also has 3 what we call septic receiving stations. So this is for truckers that can bring wastewater volumes into the system. We do about 50% of the business through Innisfail, and that's mainly because the Innisfail station is closest to the Glenifer Lake Carefree Resort RV resorts. That's by far our biggest customer. And Main Road Consulting, which is a maintenance company for the highways, who I think they're one of your taxpayers in the commercial area there directly across the street from us, is another major user. So So just put into perspective some of the costs, and I didn't put it on the slide at the time, but the annual cost for Innisfail to SRD is roughly $2 million a year. That accounts for about 35% of the, call it $5.86 million of water and wastewater expenses that the town spends for your water utilities. In terms of your overall operating budget, it looks like it's roughly 10% of the annual operating cost of the town. And looking at what your typical monthly home water utility bill is, SRD's component for that is about 25%. So we're a relatively big component that is critical service infrastructure. If it doesn't work, we're going to hear about it in a hurry. On to the next one, please, Karen. So I wanted to bring up inflow and infiltration. I'm sure everyone's aware of this. Every town has inflow problems in their municipal collection system. And the wet weather in 2020, and especially this year as well, 2022, we had some large spikes as opposed to spiks. I noticed I have a E missing in my word there, in May and July. This happens every year. The rains come and the volumes go up. So there are some significant savings that the town could realize by mitigating that as much as possible. Stephen's aware of this. We talk about this at every meeting. I'm sure he brings it up to folks around this table as well. But there is quite tangible, high rate of return capital type investments here to mitigate this to some degree. The other impact of I&I is that the more rainwater that the system pumps, the faster the pumps wear out, the faster the line needs to be replaced. So it's important that all members try to focus on that as much as possible, and it's critical in driving our not only our annual operating costs but our full cycle long-term costs. So I mentioned earlier the lift station. Council's going to be aware of this because you just approved the lease back on August, maybe even July meeting. I can't remember the exact date. So it immediately offsetting roughly 5 acres of land just south of the lift station itself. So there was a condition in the ISIP grant that there had to be an executed lease. So now that that is done, we're waiting for the approval from the Ottawa side of the grant program to say go ahead. So that's where we're sitting at the moment. In the case of Innisfail, it's what we're calling a two-way pond. So it'll have a liner in it. Any water that is diverted to that pond will be retained. It'll be metered and measured on its way back into the system. So there won't be any water that just sits out there to cause any odor issues or anything like that. Typically when you use these things, it's mostly rainwater, but so odors wouldn't be a big issue. But this is quite a different design basis than Bowden, which is a one-way trip. So just down to the south, once the water is pumped to that pond, it never comes back. On to the next one, please, Kara. So why are emergency storage ponds important? Those of you that may or may not be aware that we, for the first time in SRD's history, actually had some fairly major flooding at the Olds lift station. It happened 3 times in roughly 6 weeks. And this is a snapshot of Lake SRD, which should not be there. That should be a canola field with no water. And what ended up happening in those floods, and the picture on the left is a satellite image that looked at the amount of land that was impacted. It was roughly 10 acres. The water in some places was a meter to 2 meters deep, so let's call it 50 or 60,000 cubic meters of untreated wastewater hit the ground, and there was really nothing else that could be done. In this case, it was almost entirely driven by intense rainstorms that just overwhelmed their collection system. The station itself pumped virtually at design level, a little bit lower. We did learn one pinch point in Old's case, and we'll show you what Innisfail station performance. The graphs aren't great, but the blue line is the level in the wet wells, and off on the left-hand side, you can see around June 10th or 12th, it draws nice straight lines. It's the big monsoon rains came on June 14th. The blue lines and the level starts bouncing all over the place. The orange lines are the outlet flow measured in liters per second, and it jumped substantially in both Innisfail and Bowden. Even though the rain intensity locally on the ground wasn't quite as high, the station was definitely hit with very high flow rates, but didn't really have any big problems. On to the next one again there, please. So the design flow rate for this should say Innisfail up there. I copied the table and forgot to change it from Bowden. So this is your data, is roughly 275 liters per second. And from the pre-flood period to the peak flow rates that the pumps handled, the station in Innisfail operated virtually at design capacity, which is quite encouraging actually, because the system's 8 or 10 years old, and the theoretical design capacity is just that. It's just, you know, perfect situation, unfouled pipeline, perfect pumps, all these things. We should be able to do 275 liters per second, and the station came very close to achieving that. So while the Innisfail station did have some very high levels, we never quite got close to that flood point. We did back in, I guess it was July of 2020. We came a foot or so from having a flood at the station. But this time around, no particular problems in Bowden. The pumps ran hard for the period of time that they needed to maintain that level, but the levels weren't building. One big advantage for Innisfail being downstream of the Bowden facility is there's 350,000 cubic meters of storage capacity at the former Bowden lagoons. So very quickly, when we're having problems in Olds, we made the call operationally to divert any volumes that we could to Bowden to avoid having, you know, multiple stations in distress at the same time. And the city of Red Deer also required us to ditch anything we could, because not only do they handle the South Red Deer system, but they have the Sylvan Lake Regional, North Red Deer, plus the city, and their whole plant was being flooded on June 14th as well. So the importance of building this emergency infrastructure is something that the board has recognized as important not only for Innisfail, but for all of the members eventually. We'll get them in each of the major stations. So hammering on the I&I impact again, what this chart is showing is a little red dashed line is kind of what the average flow rate would be before the rain. And then the rains start to come, and you can see these curved lines are indicative of, even though it rains for maybe 12 hours, it takes a month, sometimes 6 weeks, for the impact of that rain to finally get to the point where the flow rates get back to where it was before it rained. So the area under the curve, if you will, is how much rainwater was processed. And what happened in Olds, and to a lesser extent in Innisfail, we get these compounding storms that were over 1 or 2 weeks, and it just recharges the water table, and then somewhere in your system, whether it's a manhole or cross connections to stormwater drains, whatever it might be, that water table then is discharging into the sewer system, and it comes to the lift station. So the volumes in June and July of 2020 for Innisfail alone were about 50% above the 5-year average. So what that translates to in the bill that you get from SRD was about $210,000 for 2 months worth of rainwater. So this hammers home, or what I'm trying to do is hammer home the economic driver behind minimizing that I&I as much as possible. So I mentioned earlier that the board had a strategic planning session looking at some of the long-term challenges, and the initial discussion around the rate or fee for services was, you know, we got to drive this lower, it's got to be a lower rate, and then the mood kind of changed a little bit to we actually get reasonable value for the amount of capital that's here that offsets the town's requirement to build and maintain future wastewater treatment infrastructure. So we'll cover that a little bit. Another issue was the current bylaw and how the rate model generates cash for future capital reserves is flawed, we'll say, to some degree. It has a contingency in it that sometimes leads to underfunding of those reserves, so I'll talk about that. And then lastly, just from a communication point of view, elevating the commission's profile, not only within its membership, which is what I'm doing today, but also have folks like yourself, every time you get a chance to get in front of your local MLA or MP or whoever, start lobbying or advocacy for long-term support for maintaining this infrastructure, because again, the $200 million worth of capital for that population base that it serves is an extensive amount of a tax burden potentially to maintain the system over the next 75 years. So quickly on to the fees. It's just a little chart of what the fees have done since 2016. The operating costs are heavily driven by the City of Red Deer fees. We're price takers on that contract. We don't have any negotiating power. They use the American Public Utilities model to tell us what the rates are going to be, but it turns out to be about 65%, give or take. 5 major cost components account for most of the operating costs. The only one that we can really control to some degree is chemicals. So at each station, there's a bioxide chemical injected to try to keep the H2S levels down to a minimum. And the rest of the costs tend to be variable as well in terms of electrical utilities, contract operators, et cetera. So all of those items are all going to be faced with at least the 5 to 7% inflation rate that everybody has seen lately. Chemical suppliers, got a meeting with them on Monday. They're guiding to 25 to 30% increase per liter for bioxide. So all of these costs are going to roll in. This is a very preliminary estimate, so don't hold me to this, administration. But it's looking like we'll see a fairly sizable increase this year to about 265 to 270 per cubic meter. And it really depends as well on how much wastewater is generated in the system. So the rate model is essentially a rate or cost recovery model. There's no profit or anything built in other than just the reserves piece. So on to the next one from there. So the current model accounts for a contribution for capital reserves, emergency response, and rate stabilization. It's around $835,000. But historically within SRD, if the volume, or let's say the actual operating cash flow didn't match the budget perfectly, then there wasn't sufficient financial cash flow to fund these reserves. So this is somewhat common in some municipalities, but in SRD's case, it's about 50% of the time. There was actually enough money to set aside what was intended to in the rate model. So the board has recognized with the system now getting into the 10-year time period, we need to start firming up the reserves dollars for future use to capital replacement. So we're going to be charging, let's call it a rate rider. So we'll split the fees into 2 components for 2023. That there'll be a dedicated amount of money raised for reserve components. So next year it's going to be around 25 cents per cubic meter based on the total system volume. So the fee will be, again, that 260, 270 kind of range, but 25 cents of it will be fixed and dedicated, hard-coded directly to the reserve accounts, with the balance being the operating cost component. On to the next one, we're getting close to being done. In the past, the commission has had, let's say, a bit of a confrontational relationship with the city. It goes back just very briefly historically when the SRD system was built, the city, or was contemplating to be built, the city said our rate will be 70 cents per cubic meter. The thing gets built, $150 million gets invested in the ground, plant comes on and they go, oops, we had a model error, it's actually $1.07. And it's never really quite come around to sort that all out. So that's a little bit of the history. We've recognized now that the past is the past, and we got to move forward and try to build that relationship and increase SRD's cooperation with the plant. On behalf of the South Red Deer Commission, the province provided the city of Red Deer with roughly $90 million of grant funding to build the plant capacity to handle the SRD volumes for the lifespan of the asset. However, the commissions have very little say at the table when doing long-term planning and what goes into these rate models for the city itself. So one of the initiatives that we're going to try to push for is actually in our operating contracts is to have this joint operating agreement where each of the commission members will have ideally an opportunity to sit down with the decision makers at the city and really understand what the long-term planning is looking like. Just there's no big surprises. So the second piece is, as I mentioned earlier, this is a massive piece of infrastructure that is going to take a lot of money over the next 50 to 70 years to keep in good working order and do the capital replacement renewals as needed. That may be beyond the capability of relatively small rural communities. So the opportunity, or the challenge, I guess is maybe a better word, is to advocate to senior levels of government to keep this in mind, that the rural commissions are going to need some help with additional grant funding down the road to maintain this asset. The design of the system itself was all done in about 2008, so everybody was growing at 8% a year, and life was good, money was everywhere. So the system was built on projections that simply have not materialized. So we're only pumping about 60% of the water rate today that the original business models would have predicted for 2022, and relatively small on the full design capacity. So the assumptions that went into it ended up with this expensive asset that's bigger than we maybe need. Too late now, it's in the ground, we still have to maintain it. So that's where lobbying or advocacy work on the senior governments, the earlier we start, the better to recognize that problem. So the last issue, it's really difficult to make money off a wastewater transmission system, virtually impossible. Nobody seems to want it. There's not a lot of value in the product that we handle. But we are looking at implementing some newer technologies where it makes sense and where there's grant funding. So one of them is waste heat recovery. There's quite a bit of heat in wastewater. Even during the winter, the temperature of the water is around 12, 14 degrees. So there is some potential there. We need to have a heat sink nearby, so some industrial setting or something like that can use that heat. That's one thing that I've been looking at. Some of you may be familiar with the town of Sundre. Recently built I don't know if I'd call it experimental, but an alternative water treatment facility. So at some time in SRD's future, the contract will expire with Red Deer or the plant will be full. So now's the time to start thinking about what other alternatives do we have to that pinch. And then the last opportunity is, this is picking up again a bit here lately with the oil prices coming up, is utilizing treated or partially treated wastewater for use in fracturing in the oil patch. So those are some of the areas that may not generate revenue, but may offset some of the cost to some degree to try to bend that operating cost curve. So that's kind of the overview that I wanted to share with everyone, and open up an invitation for any questions. And just so you know who I am, if anyone ever wants to go take a look or have any questions, Gene knows how to get a hold of me at least. So if there are any questions or anything, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, thank you, Michael, for the presentation. Very interesting. And any questions? Councillor Harrison.
Thank you, Mayor Barkley. More of a comment through to Michael that there's a lot to digest in the last 20 minutes here about where we're headed.
This is the short version, Don.
Yeah, I've sat in some of your meetings, and you know, and we have a number of constituents in our gallery here, and it's good for them to hear also what we heard today, because you know, when all they see is that utility increase when it comes out on our utility notice, not understanding sort of the background of what goes into what we need to do. The question that I have you or the commission have you developed an asset management plan for your assets going forward, so that we know, you know, in 10 years we need, I'll only use a number, $10 million for our reserve? Thank you.
We do have a high-level asset management plan that was part of the design basis. So when we had all the operating manuals come over from Stantec, which was the engineering contractor, so it had, you know, reasonable estimates of service life for the major piece of equipment, and we're still kind of halfway through most of those bigger costs. So two parts to the answer is yes, we have an idea roughly of what decade money needs to be spent. But in this year's budget, I will be looking for the board to approve some capital assessment dollars. So to actually go out and run, you know, tests on the pump stations, see where the pumps really are. That's really is the heart of this system, and they do decay over time. So that work will be kind of a setup to get a better handle on, you know, is pump number 3 in Innisfail have 7 years left or 2? So those are the types of things that we're getting into now. I talked briefly about the reserves that we're currently budgeting in our rate models, roughly $835,000. But the annual financial depreciation of this asset, so meaning how much dollars you need to save for the future to build it, is about $2.8 million. And that assumes that the Waskesiu system can be built for $1, which it can't. So in other words, we need to start planning for building up more capital dollars. So that's why the response was to let's hard code the reserves contribution so that we don't have this underfunding issue, because it's really hit and miss. If you have a wet year like we do this year, the commission generates more cash flow. We have enough money to actually fund reserves. But if we have a dry year, you can have a cash flow negative year. And not only you don't have money to pay the bills, you don't have money to feed the reserves. And that's what we're trying to avoid in the long haul.
Councillor Bates.
So first I have a comment, I guess it's a comment, somewhat to the gallery too, but this is my 9th year on council, and I think every year we've devoted a considerable portion of capital to infiltration control. And the irony is then, of course, we don't put out as much volume as the SRD expected we would. And so the income is down. It's that circle. The question, I guess, is, it's probably still too new, but I know when the feds redid the sewer system at the Bowden Institution, they refused to come on this line, which they should have.
They were in it, and then they weren't.
Right, and now they're even in control of some of your grants. Have you any indication from them that they'll ever come on this line?
That particular issue came up about 2 years ago in strategic planning session, and I did chase down all the appropriate people in the correction services to see what the appetite was, and it was basically zero. However, they did have some problems with their lagoon this year, so maybe the chance again to ring the bell a little bit. But the cost to bring on the institution is about $12 million because it needs its own lift station. So it would need to have, it would essentially be an expansion of the commission. The institution would be treated like a new member municipality, and all those cost sharing are all in the bylaws and the agreements. So it's possible, but I wouldn't put a lot of weight on it at the moment personally, because they have a lagoon system that generally works.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I think that's all the questions. So
Great.
again, thank you so much. I don't know, at some point in time, I'm not just us, but it may be good to have a tour.
Yeah, we're going to certainly plan a tour for elected officials and administration. Don just had his second knee replacement in 11 months, so he's been off for most of the summer. So as soon as he's back and walking around a little bit more was the plan to set up one of those sessions. We have talked about public open houses as well, but from a safety perspective, that's maybe not the best way to go, but something that we could consider if there's any interest or value in it. It's not the kind of place you're going to want to take the kids for a barbecue on Sunday anyways, but for elected officials and administration, it's certainly an option that we're looking at. So anyways, thanks everyone for your time, and hopefully everybody learned a little bit about SRD.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
That's true.
Okay, we'll move into 4.1 correspondence. I'll have somebody please make a motion that we accept this as information.
Mayor Barkley, I'll make that motion.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or anything? No. Okay, all in favor? Perfect, thank you. And then we'll go into our roundtable discussion, and we will begin with Councillor Maceros today.
Thank you, Mayor Barkley. I don't have too much to report between last meeting and this one. Thanks.
Thank you. And Councillor Dunham?
Thank you, Mayor Barkley. Me as well. Very slow week last week.
Councillor Wing?
Ditto. Still just thinking about all that we learned and heard from our waste to energy information session just before we had our little bit of a break. I thought that was a great evening. Enjoyed it very much and really enjoyed the questions and the quality of the thought that people brought. So it was good. And then we have our first MPC meeting tomorrow. It's the first one since July the 19th. So that's good. And the Chamber continues to be working hard. Nominations for the Business of the Year Awards have opened. So we are looking forward to an awards event on October the 14th. More information will be coming out about that. And the posting for our executive director is live now. It's hosted by Indeed, which is an online job search site. So we're moving forward.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Bates.
Okay, so the waste to energy, yeah, that was really good. I've heard 2 or 3 comments from the people that I knew that I tried to encourage to be there, how knowledgeable Sean was, and the fact that he would answer every question, never had to put one off, and even talk about the things that benefited them. It really struck home with a lot of people. I think I picked up the last burger today at the Victim Services Barbecue. They had lots left, but I was probably the last one there. I'm just curious if we have an update on the houses we're building. They just seem to have gone to a total standstill in my neighborhood in the last several months. No, several weeks, probably feels like months. Is there anything we could get there?
I guess I don't have a real update as to why the construction has stalled, or we haven't seen a lot of movement, particularly on the Abbey houses. I can let council know that the 2 Abbey houses are conditionally sold at this point, but yeah.
Okay, it's just my observation that the True Line got a couple of weeks ahead. Really, a couple of weeks is all, even though they look like they're massively ahead. But neither one has done anything for weeks. It's just what I see.
Mayor Barkley, Councillor Bates, we can follow up and just get some idea or understanding when they will commence the construction once again.
Yeah. Well, and one's certainly in a better position than the other. When the weather gets bad, all they have to do is finish the inside. But okay. Yeah, MPC tomorrow. I was still looking at the correspondence when we approved it. I see that letter from Towfield on the victim services. That only went out in late August. And I just wonder, it's the only one I've seen. And we did talk about AM and what we might do there. So I think we all need to keep our thinking caps on what else we can do as far as individually or collectively. It totally flew below my radar. I'm just confessing that. And I had put in my calendar, it happens to be the same day as the Energy Futures Lab. Maybe it got superseded and changed. Was Enhance having an open house in around that same time with the carbon capture?
I think that it was tentative, but I haven't seen anything about it at all, so.
Okay, we're assuming that maybe it isn't.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bates. Councillor Hystad.
Thanks, everybody. What I'd like to bring forward is number 1, the Eagles 75th anniversary. The ice looks really good, the pictures that I've seen. I keep on thinking about the car show just recently, the last little bit. It was a great event. I do have the Historical Village meeting tomorrow at 7 p.m. And a lot of positive comments about waste energy and how Sean had answered the questions as well. I guess a concern of mine with the victim services piece is how it was rolled out. I did hear about it in July. And I think politically it was just that's just the way they wanted to move with it. And unfortunately, I think it catches everybody off guard when you roll something out in the summertime. I think that's on purpose. So, it's not a surprise to me being involved in politics for a number of years. But and the last thing I would say is, I think it was our last meeting that we had, our regular council meeting. We made a number of motions, or actually what I noticed when I reviewed the tape or the video, when we come out of council or we come out of in camera, at the last meeting, we didn't put the camera on. and I guess through myself to administration, if we can just remember that we can put that camera on following coming out of council. So that's all I got this week. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Harrison?
Thank you, Mayor Barkley. I also attended the Farm Energy presentation, found it very informative, and certainly looking forward to further discussions with the group there. I did attend the burger lunch today, and they were good burgers. Other than that, that's about all I did this past week, so I turn it back to you. Pardon? Oh.
Okay, thank you. I'm just talking to myself. That's not unusual. Yeah, so I guess it's the last meeting. Of course, the Varma Energy, both here in Innisfail and up in Edmonton. I also attended the Public Works Barbecue, their end of summer barbecue on the 26th of August. Attended the Presbyterian Church 130th celebration on August 28th and the car show after that. I met with the chair of the Alberta Community Crime Prevention Association last week. Had a meeting with Minister Shandro, so Mayor Rob Stewart and the Mayor of Caroline and CEO Becker and myself met with him last week with respect to the Alberta Provincial Police Force, also brought up victim services at that time. And let's see, had lunch with the Equus chair last week, and also several business visits, and as per their request. And then this week we have the Community Economic Development meeting. There's a caregiver forum on Thursday at the LLC. The Central Alberta Mayors Group is meeting this Thursday, and Sean and Varma are coming to present to that group. There's a second in a series of the Alberta Police Service webinar this Friday, I believe that is. And then the Penhole Parade is this Saturday, which I committed to. So we will now move into upcoming events, please. I'll just have somebody make a motion that we accept the upcoming events as information.
I'll make that motion, Mayor Barkley.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Maceras. All in favor? Great. And then we'll have a motion to please go in camera.
I'll make that motion, Mayor Barkley.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dunham. All in favor?